What's happening, everybody? It's Sean with Reactions to the Classics, and today we're going to take a little trek through the history of Christian music, 1972 through 1978. We're going to look at a top 11 songs from that era, brought to us by a friend, longtime supporter, and I know he probably doesn't want to be called this, but Christian music expert, Scott. Thank you, Scott. Appreciate you. Appreciate all the patrons who make this thing go. If you'd like to support us in any way, check out the Patreon link below, the Patreon link on the Instagram. We put up videos every single day. It is a ton of man hours. Any sort of consideration you give us support, we super appreciate. All right, Scott always writes up these excellent things. This is all him, man. So he said, when reacting recently to one of my admittedly esoteric lists of Christian music, Sean expressed an interest in learning more about the history of the genre. I did. So this list is the first installment in that education, but it comes with some introduction. First of all, we obviously can't explore the long history of Christian music because we would have to go back through 2,000 years of art and innovation. We believers too often ignore the truth that some of the greatest music in world history was composed by Christ followers who were expressing their love for God in symphonies, cantatas, concertos, and in ensembles. Names like Bach, Handel, Haydn, Beethoven, and others spring to mind. Knowing that such artists led the ways in the arts has caused me through the years to wonder where such innovation and artistry has gone within the Christian community. With a few exceptions, we find today's artists not innovating, but chasing after their secular counterparts. All that is fantastic points. By the way, I'm a Christian if you've never watched this before, so I'm totally on board with Scott and his feelings towards contemporary Christian music, CCM, as it is called. And I never really thought about the fact that all these famous composers were Christians. That's a great point. In 2021, the documentary The Jesus Music was released, a film that chronicles the beginnings of the CCM industry, starting with artists like Larry Norman, more on him later, and the band Love Song, and the ensuing avalanche of artists and bands that sprang initially from the West Coast Christian revival among young people, especially the hippie population, known as the Jesus movement. Instrumental in that revival was a small country church called Calvary Chapel, led by conservative pastor Chuck Smith. He welcomed these long-haired, poorly dressed kids into his church along with their new brand of music. And Maranatha music was born, which gave rise to dozens of artists and bands that varied in style and quality. I'll refer you to the film for the bigger story, which I haven't watched yet because I didn't know if it would just be a big kind of publicity and manipulated thing, or if it's going to be true. But even that documentary left out what I consider to be some pivotal names and voices of the time. I was a teenager, Scott says, in San Francisco while this was happening and fell in love with a number of artists and bands that didn't make the documentary. This new Jesus music was not welcomed by the more conservative, traditionally minded Christians among us. My own parents, Scott says, when they first heard the records I was bringing into the house, reflexively protested this could not be Christian music because it has drums and electric guitars and a beat. Ironically, the music I was introducing them to was pretty mellow by today's standards, or even when compared with what was to come within the following decade. Sadly, as the Christian music industry graduated into the 80s, the industry part of the scene took over and marketability became the primary focus and impetus for new artists and consequently left behind the pioneers, many of whom continued to create strong, mature, innovative music. This list contains my personal history of Christian music. This means as we explore this list, you'll only get my favorites, as it should be, right? Some of these artists aren't new to my list, but many are. Some of them continued on even up to the present day, but others came and went, yet they left a lasting impression on many who were impacted by their work. The list covers the years 1972 through 1978, a period I consider the first wave of CCM. The quality and depth of writing and performance varies, of course, as does the production quality. Much as this has to do with smaller budgets, as this was, with rare exceptions, music outside the mainstream of big record labels and top-notch producers. And we didn't have computers, where now artists who have no money can make albums that sound fantastic, right? Because they have all the technology sitting on their table, but we didn't have that back then. But this isn't necessarily a bad thing. The music also possesses a healthy innocence and simple faith in Jesus and his written word. You also notice a strong evangelistic thread woven through the lyrics. One of the hallmarks of the Jesus movement and the decade's adolescent Christianity in general was our driving motivation to tell others about this perfect man, Jesus, his sacrifice for us on the cross, his resurrection, and imminent return. Most of these musicians were pretty new to the Christian idea and were enthusiastic about imploring others to come along. So here you go. Enjoy the education, but watch out, because Scott says there might be a quiz at the end. Okay, so a couple things. The music won't be in the video because it'll get blocked, but there's Vimeo link below. For something like this, well, for all my stuff, but something like this, I highly suggest you follow along with this and listen to the music. I'm going to have the lyrics up as always. Also, always important, Stuff like this, very, very important. And I mentioned it, I am also a Christian. I am also, I don't know, jaded towards today's Christian music. If you were watching this and you love it, I'm not saying all of it's bad. I'm not saying all of it's misguided. I'm not saying all of it comes from a heart that is not towards Jesus, but I'm saying most of it does, right? Because it's become commercialized. It's all about the money. If you knew what they do with copyright and with publishing rights and the way they manipulate things. And I'm not going to go into all that, but I'm just saying I'm right on board with Scott as we take this journey. So all of that out of the way, let's get to his first song. And you see it below. We got Sun come out from the album The Way in 1974. Scott says, one of the first bands to emerge from Calvary Chapel and the fledgling Maranatha label, The Way, personified what would come to be recognized as the Maranatha sound, which was a quasi-Eagles country rock tinge musical style that resonated with Jesus people. At my San Francisco church, my friends and I weren't hippies, but we did love the music. It was ours and it was really good. The Way released only 2 albums and then went their separate ways, but their music provided a template and inspiration for future artists and bands. Lyrically, the song is simple, as most of this early writing tends to be, but it does clearly reflect the simplicity of a newfound love for Jesus and the new pair of eyes given to everyone who allows Jesus to transform his life. Let's get it. Sun Come Out by The Way. And the sunshine they're asking about, I'll have to tell you, it's S-O-N, right? It's Jesus. So just keep that in mind the whole time they're talking about sun. It's son of God, not sun up in the air. Sun came out and shine your love my way. Sun come out and bright my day. This world's getting harder to bear. My burden's getting harder to share. You know that nothing else and compare to your love. Oh, please, won't you spare some sunshine in my life? Those great harmonies, right? A little sunshine makes things right. Sun come out and shine your love my way. Sometimes I get so blind I can't see, and darkness has its grip on me. I stumble for reality. You shine your light and set me free. So just some really, really cool lyrics there. Great harmony. So a good way to start this list. All right, next up on the list, a guy that I'm very familiar with because he's shown up in a lot of different things for Scott. We got Phil Keaggy and A Time and a Place from the What a Day album in 1973. Scott says, on my Phil Keaggy list from a few months ago, I included 2 songs from this album. Those 2 songs reflected Keaggy's joyful enthusiasm, not only in his lyrics, but in the playing of the instruments, all of which are performed by Phil. This song is no different. The theology, though simple, is flawless and permeated with a childlike and unwavering trust in his Savior. Scott says a couple months ago in October of 2022, he saw Phil in concert, just him and his guitar, and it's clearly evident that now in his 70s, Keaggy's childlike love for Jesus and his enthusiasm in communicating that love is still intact and as infectious as ever in his singing and in his ingenious guitar talent and skill. I mean, Phil is absolutely tremendous. All right, Phil Keaggy, A Time and a Place. Before we even get into the song or the lyrics, you notice that virtuoso guitar playing even back then in 1973. You could feel it, but a nice song. There's a time and a place for everything. This is the time. This is a place. We can sing songs and play guitar and shoot the breeze, and we can talk about the human race. After all, we are part of it all. So he's like, we can get involved and just, talk and talk about things going on in this world. But then he flips it, right? Have you considered the sparrows up above? They do not sow, they do not reap, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them, and his love for you is much more deep. And after all, you are part of it all. So he takes it from our human worries into a more heavenly realm, right? And he's talking about Matthew 6:26, if you want to go read it. And then we go up to the birds from their perspective, right? Said the robin to the sparrow, I'd really like to know why these anxious human beings rush about and worry so. Said the sparrow to the robin, friend, I think it must be that they have no heavenly Father, such as cares for you and me. So he's saying like these people are so like running around, right? So worried about everything. And this is almost 50 years ago. If they see us now, they'd be like, wow, this is really insane, right? But yes, you have to worry about things in the world. Yes, you have responsibilities, but ultimately, right, if you know Jesus and you follow Jesus, you can rest comfortably knowing that he's going to take care of you on this earth, but more importantly for eternity. So really good offering there from Phil. Next up, we have The Outlaw from Larry Norman off Only Visiting the Planet album in 1973. Scott says Larry Norman is widely regarded as the grandfather of contemporary Christian music. He started recording his Renegade brand of Jesus music in the late 60s, but this album, released in 1973, launched him into the wider Christian community consciousness. Norman wasn't part of the Calvary Chapel crowd of musicians, and his style and lyrics are strong indications of his separateness from what he, even then, considered the commercialization of Jesus. He was one of a kind and remained an outlier until his death in 2008. With this song, Norman attaches to Jesus the renegade countercultural identity it's certainly Norman related to, and which appealed to the hippie countercultural movement of the late 60s and early 70s. But Norman nailed it in that he wasn't wrong about Jesus, who does indeed cut against the grain of popular culture more now than ever. If you want to learn more about Larry Norman, I go deep into it on a top 10 I did for one of our other patrons, Osmond. It'll be up on the channel soon if you're watching this right when I drop this video, and there'll be a part 2 coming in the next couple months. But Larry Norman, I did a ton of research and share a lot of stuff about him. A very interesting guy. The Outlaw Larry Norman, really good song. I mean, I super enjoy the Larry Norman top 10 that I did. He just kind of dives out and delves out everything that was said about Jesus. I mean, he's going through it biblically, right? Some say he's an outlaw, that he roamed across the land with a band of unschooled ruffians and few old fishermen, his disciples, right? They weren't of the educated. They weren't of the religious. So people were like, who is this guy? No one just knew where he came from or exactly what he'd done, but they said it must be something bad that kept him on the run, because Jesus obviously kept moving to fulfill his purpose. Some say he was a poet, that he'd stand upon the hill, Sermon on the Mount, right? That his voice could calm an angry crowd and make the waves stand still. That he spoke in many parables a few could understand, but the people sat for hours just to listen to this man. Some say he was a sorcerer, a man of mystery. He could walk upon the water. He could make a blind man see. That he conjured wine at weddings and did tricks with fish and bread. That he talked to being born again and raised people from the dead. He did all those things, but see, back in the day, the authorities used that against him, saying like, look, he's a sorcerer. He's not of God. Some say a politician who spoke of being free. He was followed by the masses on the shores of Galilee. He spoke out against corruption, and he bowed to no decree, and they feared his strength and power, so they nailed him to a tree. Some say he was the Son of God, a man above all men, that he came to be a servant and to set us free from sin. And that's who I believe he is, because that's what I believe. And I think we should get ready, because it's time for us to leave. So I read you every one of those lyrics, because it's basically a summarization, I mean, albeit a brief one, of Jesus's life. So if you're watching this and are a Christ follower, great. Those things are encouraged. If you're watching this and you're not, maybe that gets you a little bit curious to go dive more into the New Testament. Start out with the book of Matthew. It's about 2/3 of the way through the Bible if you are doing that. Next up, our fourth selection. We got More Than Sunlight from Mustard Seed Faith from the Sail On Sailor album in 1975. Scott says, even though Mustard Seed Faith recorded only 2 studio albums, both in the early to mid-70s, they quickly gained a cult following and have, through the ensuing decades, cemented their place among the most loved and revered pioneers of CCM. One of the first Maranatha bands, Mustard Seed Faith, was comprised of 4 guys: lead singer Odin Fong, the lead on this track, John Bellis, Pedro Buford, and Louis McVeigh, who all shared the lead vocals. This track was the band's best known and most loved tune. It received considerable airplay well into the 80s and is a prime example of what we now consider mellow nature of the initial CCM music. As with most of the lyrics on this list, the song depicts a relationship with Jesus that is nearly romantic in its tone. Mustard Seed Faith, More Than the Sunlight. A pretty simple song lyrically, which is just fine, right? It's a pretty simple concept. You're more than sunlight to me. Everywhere I look, I see your face. And when I'm sad and lonely, I hear your voice and I hear you say, and then they get that nice harmony type of tone to the voice. I love you, my child. I love you, my child. Cloudy, dark times can't hold me. The pathway gets hard. Sometimes there's pain, but when I feel like falling, I hear your voice and hear you say, I love you, my child, I love you, my child. And they go on that. One of the highlights of this thing is the musicianship, right? The previous tracks are sparse instrumental, which is fine because it draws you into the lyrics. But this one, man, the sax, a little bit other brass, and they're just a beautiful arrangement in here. So enjoyed that one. Fifth selection is Prince song from second chapter of Acts from the book from the album in the volume of the book in 1975. Scott says second chapter of Acts came along in the early 70s as a backup singers for Barry McGuire. Don't worry, we'll get to him in a few minutes. Who discovered them and launched their careers. The band is comprised of 2 sisters and their brother. Annie Herring was the primary songwriter, lead singer, and piano player, and Nellie Greason and Matthew Ward round out the trio. They're renowned for their harmonies and for Annie's thoughtful, Jesus-centered lyrics. The trio lasted well into the 90s and became a template for scores of vocal bands that would follow them. With this track, Herring takes the fairy tale image of Prince Charming and the Princess in Waiting and uses it as a metaphor for a relationship and ultimate reuniting with Jesus. Really clever way to end the song with a little "Oh Come Let Us Adore Him." I'm filming this in December, so it's Christmas time, so hearing that one a lot. A very clever way of songwriting here, right? And she's taking the story of the prince and the princess, and then, yeah, tying it into our relationship with Christ. I've got a brand new story that you've heard a time or two about a prince who kissed a girl right out of the blue. Hey, this story ain't no tale to me now, for the Prince of Peace has given me life somehow. You know what I mean? My sleep is over. It's a little Cinderella thing. I've been touched by his fire that burns from his eyes and lifts me higher and higher. I'll live forever with him by my side. Talks about him coming again on a white horse. So a very, very smart way of implementing the fairy tale that everybody knows basically into real life. And like, this is what Jesus is doing for us. So clever songwriting. Just liked all of it. See, I wasn't lying to you. Next up, Anyone But Jesus from Barry McGuire and his album Lighten Up in 1974. Scott says Barry McGuire is best known for his 1960s protest song, Eve of Destruction, which I had never heard until we did a song reaction. We have that one up if you want to check it out later. It has almost 13,000 views. No, I don't have that memorized. I've looked before this list, but I mean, it's been very popular. After he surrendered his life to Jesus in the early 70s, he quickly became a force within the early formation of Christian music. His energy and larger-than-life personality were hallmarks of his music and stage presence. Lighten Up, which is this album, was McGuire's second studio album after his conversion, the first coming in 1973. Both albums featured Second Chapter of Acts, right, our previous act on this countdown, on backing vocals before the band released their own initial album. With this track, which closes the album, McGuire talks about his change of mindset when he came to Jesus. All right, Barry McGuire, Anyone But Jesus. You definitely felt this one, man. It was way more up-tempo, and you could just feel his emotion in it. You know, once I lived in darkness, I'd chosen not to see. Then Jesus came, the way, the life, the truth to set me free, which is a little John 14:6, except he also finishes with no one comes to the Father except through me. But in my fear, I tried to hide. My Lord called me to his side. I threw away my foolish pride, and now I know why Jesus died. And I'm not going to think about it. I'm not going to talk about it. I'm not going to sing about anyone but Jesus. And then he says, and Barry, I mean, I'm sure he had, you know, lots of fame from Eve of Destruction. I remember days of lonely living, giving me pleasure, pain, and pride. Guilty, shame, and emptiness, Lord, a dead man lived inside. Then you came into my night, flooded it with your truth and life. Your gentle hands restored my sight. To save my life, you were crucified. And then later on, he says, he turns it to us, right? A little evangelism in here. So if you're living in darkness and you can't see the light, and everything you try and do, ain't nothing turns out right. Well, you take a tip from me, my friend. It's getting closer to the end. Just take the master by the hand, and then you'll understand he gets back in to that chorus part. But man, what an emotional and just a great piece of musicianship there, as well as a great song lyrically. All right, next up with our seventh selection, we got Feel the Love, Loved by Love Song from the Love Song album in 1972. Now, several of these final ones are not on Spotify or anywhere else, so I'll be playing them with some files that Scott sent me. He says Love Song was the first band to achieve popularity within and beyond the Jesus movement. They actually formed in 1970 before any of the band members were Christians, but one by one, each of them came to faith in Jesus and began attending Calvary Chapel in California. Their music was, in many ways, a soundtrack of the Jesus movement and inspired countless musicians to follow in their footsteps. Among those compelled by Love Song's music was Terry Scott Taylor, himself a new Christian attending Calvary Chapel. I've heard Taylor speak of the band's profound influence on him, motivating him in his evolving philosophy of songwriting. Phil Keaggy also joined Love Song's ranks for a time, playing with them in concerts and contributing his guitar talents to their reunion album in 1995. Love Song recorded only 2 studio albums for Maranatha Music before the bandmates went their separate ways musically, with the lead singer and primary songwriter Chuck Girard going on to a pretty successful solo career. The importance and impact of Love Song cannot be overstated in terms of their influence on the artists and bands who would follow them in the following decade. Feel the Love, obviously much different, first of all, arrangement-wise, as it was piano-driven, right, which makes it different than anything else on here. And just a nice, almost dreamy type quality to the vocal performance. The song itself is simple. It needs to be simple. Like I said, this thing's pretty simple. Save the sadness for another time. Save the words for a song that rhymes. Save the crying for the ones who've lied, who've missed all the meaning and their souls have died. Save the doubting for the morning sun, bringing daylight when there once was none. Feel the warmth that each new day can bring by believing, by receiving him. Talking about Jesus. Feel the love, and then he, the way he stretches that out. I'm not going to torture you and do it. Save the heartaches for yesterday. Now's the time to change our foolish ways. Feel the love the Son of God can bring by believing, by receiving him, and then feel the love. So they take a long time to unfold the song, which draws kind of to the power of it, kind of draws you in, that piano and the vocal performance. Next up at number 8 is a guy that needs no introduction here at this channel. John Michael Talbot, from the John Michael Talbot album in 1976, we have He Is Risen. Scott says, John Michael Talbot is no stranger to my past list, but I have to include him here as he was a vital pioneer with his country rock guitar and laser-focused perspective. Fresh off his final recording with his former band Mason Prophet, which he founded with his brother Terry in the late 60s, John was one of the first artists to sign and record with Sparrow Records. On his first solo project, John chose to play every instrument and sing every part. Let that sink in for a minute, right? With this release, John brought a fresh and unique and polished styling to the new genre, resulting in one of Christian music's greatest albums. This track's the opening cut on the album and sets the tone for what was to come. He Has Risen, John Michael Talbot. I mean, wonderful guitar work on this and just telling the story, obviously, of just what it says. He has risen. Talking about, can you hear it? Can you hear the echo in the wind? It's the story of a man that was so true. Then he's talking just all about, how it went. But they took this Nazarene, hear them screaming, Jesus the Lord. And they took this man of peace, hear them screaming, tearing his clothes, stripped him bare, scourged his back, all that stuff. And then the hammer it fell. They crucified him, blood was shed. But when they took him to the grave, they thought it was over. When they laid him in the grave, they thought it was over. When they turned and they looked, he was alive and well, came back from the dead, conquered the gates of hell. He is risen. So wonderfully written, wonderfully arranged. John Michael Talbot, just a giant in the Christian music world. We got 3 songs left. We got Lover from Bethlehem from the Bethlehem album in 1978. Scott says Bethlehem recorded only this one album. Wow. From Maranatha, and then disappeared as a band. This is a shame, as Bethlehem captured the first essence of devotion to Jesus and the musical sound of those earlier years, but coming when they did at the close of the first wave of Jesus music, Bethlehem's production values marked a clear improvement over their predecessors. Frontman Danny Daniels' vocals are exceptionally smooth and professional. I'm just sorry that this album is all we've heard from him. This cut from Bethlehem captures the essence of biblical worship without being a stereotypical worship song. The approach is justifiably soft, yet crystal clear in its message of the greatness of God and his absolute love for us. Lover by Bethlehem, as Scott pointed out, you could tell the production, very smooth voice there, but you could tell the production was stepped up. And, the song's simply just saying all the things that Jesus is, most of all, he's a lover, so that you understand, if you don't know him, or if you do know him, that he is going to be loving towards you, and not convict you if you are of him when you've made mistakes. So I thought a good tune there. And like I said, just the production value has definitely stepped up. So we got 2 tunes left. We got Dusty Road by Daniel Amos from the Daniel Amos album in 1976. Scott says, yet another staple on my past list. Daniel Amos debuted with this album and set a tone of professionalism in songwriting and musicianship. Frontman Terry Scott Taylor leads the way with smooth vocals and a more biblically nuanced perspective and creativity in his lyrics than had been seen to this point. This track displays the band's distinct country rock sound and Taylor's love for old Western metaphors. By the time their next album, Shotgun Angel, was released in 1977, the band had moved on to more adventurous styles. Then as the 70s moved into the new decade of the 80s, Daniel Amos experimented with straight-ahead rock and even new wave sounds that many in the Christian world found hard to digest. But when I was discovering these guys as a junior in high school, they became for me a companion who traveled with me through the decades. Taylor's writing and musicianship has always been a homing beacon for me amidst the stormy oceans of market-driven Christian music. That's just a fantastic written thing. Love it, man. All right, Daniel Amos, Dusty Road. You definitely felt the country. I said it at the start, just with a steel guitar was what it sounded like. And Terry Scott Taylor sounded fantastic, as he always does. And definitely an Eagles influence there, right? You can't get around it for sure with the harmonies and stuff. Just fantastic. And basically just talking about the dusty road, right? You can't see if you conjure up a dusty road and everything that he's going through. Narrow road, wide destruction. I'll enter by the door. Now win or lose, each must choose. I don't want to lose no more. So hold on, Lord, when I feel hurting. I know the pain won't stay. Oh, precious Jesus, Lord and Savior. Let me hide away. And then we get into that beautiful harmonized part. Hide away in the secret chamber of your love. Hide away in the sweet solitude and rest. When I see that ceiling falling all around me, let me hide. Oh, let me hide away. I'll take my cross and carry on. Or even when my life, it seems to be all wrong, because I know when those clouds roll on, I'll see the sun, S-O-N again, just like our first song, come shining through. So well written, very well performed. All right, here we go. We're up to our last song, our 11th song. Here he comes by Michael Omartian from the Adam Again album in 1976. Scott says this final track comes from a bit of an outlier artist on this list and within the burgeoning world of contemporary Christian music. Omartian stands out among these other artists simply because by this time he had already established himself as a sought-after keyboard session musician and was just beginning to gain some renown for his production skills. But as a Christian, he found a venue to display his musical prowess. His first album, White Horse, from which I reacted to the song Jeremiah a few months back, was a revelation in the Christian music world, given the Eagles-like soft rock tone that characterized much of CCM to this point. Michael brought with him slick production, first-rate instrumentals, and an edge to his voice that caused him to immediately stand out among his peers. The musicians he calls upon are as accomplished as he is. Guitarist Larry Carlton, bass player Leland Sklar, drummer David Kemper, and guitarist Lee Ritenour are only a few of the all-star players on this record. This track closes his second studio album with a song declaring the imminent return of Jesus for his people. The song is the culmination of a 4-song suite addressing the broken world we live in and our very real hope of the return of Jesus to come and set everything to right. Okay, Michael Omartian, Here He Comes, definitely stands out on this list as an outlier because the production level is off the charts, right? Just totally different than anything else we've heard. The Bethlehem track had some good production, but this takes it to another level. Here he comes for the last time. Through the smog, here he comes for the last time. Clear as the lightning flies out of the east sky. Quick as a thief in the night. And so he just talks about he'll be waiting for him, right? He knows the second coming is here. Don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to tell you how to run your life, but I believe the end is near. What will you do if I am right? Carry on until it's time. Through the fire, every heart will be refined. One will be watching, one will be sleeping, one will be taken away, right? That's in Matthew 24 and Luke 17, if you want to go read about that. Quite interesting. Play your song, play it till it's number one through the night. Play your song until it's done. And then he just kind of goes ahead. Go right ahead and do what they tell you. Throw your seed to the wind. But when your garden doesn't grow, who you turn to then? Here he comes for the last time. Drink his wine, mend your faith until it shines. So just a really good tune. Like I said, really stands out on this list because the production level is next level. And now we'll get to the toughest part on Scott's list for me all the time is my favorite tracks, because I say this every time, but it needs to be said every time. These people are making songs, out of their faith, to promote faith, to share the love of Jesus. So it's really hard to say like, I like this one and don't like that one. It's a little bit disrespectful, but that's what I do here. So I'm not going to say anything that I don't like in it. There wasn't anything that I didn't like in here, but my faves, and this is always such a difficult task because all the songs were pretty darn good. Honorable mentions, I'll go Prince song from second chapter of Acts. So well written, so cleverly written. And I'll go with Sun Come Out by The Way. And faves, it's a lot of them. A Time and a Place, Phil Keaggy, The Outlaw, Larry Norman. Anyone But Jesus, Barry McGuire in that impassioned performance. He Is Risen by John Michael Talbot. And Dusty Road, Daniel Amos. There's a lot of them there. So let me know what you thought of this list. Thank you, Scott, for the education. I'm assuming this is part one and there's going to be other parts to our education. But it's fun to rewind back to when the music was just about the music, right? And we weren't trying to sell millions of records or see how many t-shirts we could sell. There's nothing wrong with selling records and selling t-shirts. It's just when the heart of it becomes that and not what the heart of it should be, which is worship of Jesus, it becomes all twisted. But enough preaching for me. Until next time, guys, I will see you.